going to start off a few things. First off, you might not do it right now like we're going to tell you to do it. What I'm asking you to do is to give part of what David and me are going to teach you, give it a chance the way that we teach it. If you don't want to incorporate it at the end of the day, that's fine. That's totally fine. But try to basically take this from the ground up, because that's how we're going to teach it. I'm going to teach it from the ground up. I'm going to start off. We're going to start off with rotations. We're going to go through warm-ups. We're going to go through a stance review, just a basic Italian rapier stance review. Go into footwork, lunges and passes, measures, and then I'm going to go through finding and gaining, and then we'll transition into David's a little bit more advanced theory stuff, but also still pretty basic. That's all part of the same system. Any questions? Okay. So what is Italian rapier? All right, that's, most of you probably already know this, but it's okay if you don't. So Italian rapier, in the broader sense, it can be understood as kind of a single system that uses that a lot of different teachers taught, but most of it uses the same terminology. And from the manuals that we see, they knew about each other, and they were well-read people who had a basis in the previous manuals that existed. So I have a lot of the different manuals laid out here. Not all of them, but it really started out, the language of Italian rapier started out with Camillo Agrippa in the 1560s, and he laid out the basic ideas of the stance and the guards that we use: prima, seconda, terza, quarta, and going on from there, along with what we consider to be a lunge-based system, which certain masters deviate from. One could argue that Fabris is more pass-based. That's okay, because he still uses the same language. And then we go into what people call the big three, and that's Capoferro, Gigante, and Fabris. So Gigante wrote 2 manuals, Capoferro wrote 1, and Fabris wrote a giant one. And then basically throughout the 1600s, so those are all in the 1610s, around 1610, like 1608, 1607, 1609. Then throughout the 1600s, you get a lot of different masters who learned from schools that derived from that, read those manuals, and then talked about them in their manuals. Alfieri talks about Fabris and Capoferro in his manual. And then you have, really recently, you have 2 really great texts that are really very specifically based on Capoferro and Fabris, where, so Vienna Anonymous, if you were at Lord Baltimore's challenge, you saw Tom Leone talk about Vienna Anonymous, and C13 is recent. He didn't talk about that, but you might have seen Darren's posts about C13, maybe other people's posts about C13. So one thing that's great about Italian rapier is that we have this luxury of these teachers that had a single system, that openly talked about each other, openly talked about interpreting each other, and really led to a rich tradition that has a whole bunch of stuff. Like there was a whole separate German tradition that came off of Fabris later on with Pasha, and you have. So anyway, it's a big system, and the great thing about it is that they all kind of lead into each other and present alternate theories, and it's really probably one of the most cohesive systems that we have for rapier. So,
let me jump in real quick.
Yeah.
So, one of the things I've heard over the past 25 years doing this, people will complain and say, oh, but that's not the only way to do it, blah, 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 blah. I don't want to have to learn from a book. And I'm here to say, there are people in the SCA who win and fight well, and they have learned all the things that are in these books, but it took them trial and error over a long time to do it. One of the reasons to learn a system is because, as we're going to do here today, you can quickly understand over the course of only a couple of years and get yourself into the position where you can do this training, as opposed to spending 20 years refining your own actions over and over again. So a system is simply what the masters have learned, what people learned at swordplay, condensed down into here are the things you need to do and avoid these pitfalls that I fell into when I was young, okay? So I have seen some of the guys who have never read from a book, and I can tell you all the moves that they just made, and it's all straight out of the history. but it took them a long time and a lot of pain and effort to get there. So that's what we're trying to impart.
Yeah, one thing that's great when someone says that this is a science is that you can understand, if you understand the basics of Italian rapier and what Fabris is saying and what Capoferro is saying, you can use that as a way to evaluate other systems. Destreza fully fits within the confines of how you understand it. If you understand the science of it, if you understand of how constraints work, how finding gaining works, how angles work, what lunges and passes, the advantages and disadvantages of each, you know, you can interpret any system based off of it. So it's really just a way of understanding things, and that's the virtue of a common language of fencing. Is that when you have a common language, you can talk about it. You have a framework to be able to explain all of it. So anyway, well, we're going to start off. Let's start off with some rotations. So everyone get up if you can. So this every physical activity that I give you guys, if you don't feel physically capable to do it, sit out. That's fine. Take it at your own pace. So we're going to start out with some light rotations. The goal of rotations and warm-ups is to prevent injury. So let's start out with some basic rotations. So start with your ankles. So we'll do about 5 to 10 rotations each with your ankles. So make sure you're engaging your toes. So start clockwise. Let's do some warm-ups. So all right, if you can't do running or jogging, then you don't have to. So what we're going to do, we're just going to do some let's see. We're just going to do some basic shuttle walking, running over here. So everyone get online and along the chairs. All right. So how we're going to start this is I'm going to start at the far cone right here. I'm going to be going to each of these 5 cones, like I said, in an hourglass pattern, and going back, and I'm basically going to be kneeling down and touching each cone. So start out. If you don't feel comfortable facing one direction, you don't have to. Yes. So we'll do each one of us. We'll have so if we can divide in half and half of you go through these. So we'll do each person does the drill twice. All right. Move there. All right. Let's do it. Who here has a background in sport fencing? What? Anybody? Are you comfortable with demonstrating a sport fencing stance?
From way back when?
You don't have. I'll demonstrate.
Sure.
What?
I'll give it.
Okay. Okay. So let's show what.
I gotta stop and think. Like,
Okay.
basically.
All right. Good. So he's showing it from the front. Showing here, all right, from the side. So a basic sport fencing stance or classical fencing stance, if you're familiar with the difference or similarities therein, is equally weighted more or less. I've got an upright body. Generally, I've got my my sword hand pretty close, tucked in, maybe a little bit extended, but certainly not very much at all. And then I've got my back arm up as a counterweight. Sometimes. A lot of times in modern sport fencing, you don't see people as much doing that, but ideally that's how it is. Let's do a basic Italian defensive stance. And one thing just that I'm going to interject, just to contextualize also in the beginning, a lot of what I'm going to teach is interpreted from the manuals, because a lot of the manuals teach slightly different things. What I'm teaching is a basic idea of Italian rapier that's extrapolated from the manuals using English terminology, and occasionally I'll use Italian terms if they just feel better, or for flavor, or any number of reasons, which I'd be happy to explain. So Lucio, why don't you get up here? All right, so what I want you to do, so start off with your feet in and out. Okay, so what I want you to do is take your back foot and go back about 2 foot lengths back from that. There we go, good. All right, now, so what Capofero says, I should say, is that you want your heels basically to be in the same line. You have your front toe facing toward your opponent, and pretty much in most rapier texts in general, your front toe is almost always facing your opponent. There are very few rapier texts that I can even think of where the front toe isn't facing your opponent. That's in everything, so that's a comfy spot. All right, so you've got a line going back, and then you've got the heel of your rear foot that is in the same line, and your toe. So this is where some of the differences can be. Your toe can either be about 90 degrees or a little bit further back from that. So, depending on your physiology, I think generally with the way that women's hips versus men's hips are built a lot of the time, women are a little bit more comfortable with more of a 90-degree stance. I learned a super gigante, pushing your foot all the way back like this. If you're comfortable with it, you can do it. One of the important things about it is to try to have your knees in the same line as your toes. Do as I say, not as I do. I am duck-footed. I am naturally duck-footed. So you might not see that perfectly with me all the time, but I encourage you to do it because it is much more structurally safe. So you've got Lucio, you've got your toe basically a little bit more than 90. Now what you're going to do is you're going to weight basically as much of your weight as possible on the rear leg and lean back a little bit. All right, good. One of the ways that you can test this is you've got your weight on your rear foot. I can move my front foot freely. Usually what I do to validate this is I move my front foot to basically see, hey, can I move this freely? Now, there's a couple reasons for why you rear weight your stance. The first reason is I can slip my front foot super easy when it's rear weighted. If you're trying, so if you lunge at my leg and I'm rear weighted, I can really easily get that out of the way. If I'm front weighted, I have to get it back, and even when I'm trying, it's still slower. You have to unweight that foot in order to get it back. The other thing, besides slipping it to the rear when it's attacked, is that I have my weight already ready. I don't have to unweight my front foot as I execute a lunge. So it already has basically no weight on it. If I'm executing a pass, that's different. If I'm about to execute a pass, then I might want to weight my front foot a little bit more so that the foot that's moving in the pass is able to move freely. But we're operating from a basic defensive rapier stance. The next thing is that you can do lean back. All right. So lean back, and then your elbow. So in Gigante, you see more like what Connor's doing right here, where it's a little bit more extended and lower like this. But you can also move it to basically about right like that, where your elbow is about a fist from your from the end of your rib cage. So generally, if you're comfortable, if you have it here, that's fine. If you have it here, that's fine. The general objective is that I'm forming a nice, firm, defensive stance. Move back a little bit more. Where my opponent, I'm structuring my body so that basically, and so try to have a little bit more upright. There you go. Good. You also want to have a neutral stance. One thing that in Italian rapier you see a lot is that people will sometimes kick their butt out. And they think that leaning with your torso means kicking your butt out. It's not true. Keep your body more or less neutral on the forward axis. All right, so this is a basic, and then you also want your point more or less in the presence of your opponent in the upper part of their chest. You can bring it up to the eyes, but this is a basic defensive Italian rapier stance. So, any questions so far?
Let me nuance real quick.
Yeah.
So, and I can add this nuance for a few reasons. If you're going to put your weight on your back leg, you should not really be 90. 90 is a balanced, and that's right now that's where he is he's kind of balanced. If we start putting weight back in the back leg, your leg needs to twist to catch that. What ends up happening, and you can talk to Alessandro about this, if my weight is on the back leg while I'm at 90, then whenever I lunge, what happens is his knee folds down toward the ground as you're loading that back leg, and you launch, and you tear those tendons. So the way that this stance is created, when I say my weight back on my back leg, this has now become a mechanical spring that is working the way it's supposed to. This is now a loaded spring. When I want to actually lunge, this extends, this catches me, and now this is the spring that can load me backwards. So this is our back stance in Capoferro. I can either be back weighted, mid weighted, or front weighted with this back stance. But what I'm trying to teach my students is, if this foot rotates to 90, your weight should also rotate to more of a neutral, okay? So this is fine. You can still do everything that we want to do here with this. But if you find your weight going back, and if you want to do Capoferro and Gigante, make sure you're actually at about 120 to 130. Make sense?
Yes.
Otherwise, you're going to tear your knee at some point.
Yeah, that's how I learned it. Like I said, it feels weird when you start off, like a lot of things in Italian rapier, but I urge you to give it a little bit of a chance. So yeah, you've got that. It makes the extension a little bit easier. You see, if you look through in here, look at Gigante, you'll see back foot like always facing the rear. Okay, so that is what we consider to be the defensive stance, which is more or less the default stance in Italian rapier. If you're going to transition to the offensive, which is in conjunction with finding and gaining your opponent's blade, what you're going to do is you're going to extend the arm, and I want a nice casual extension. Whenever you extend in rapier, don't lock your arm out. Do not lock your arm out. It makes it slower, and it basically locks your arm. It makes it, there's so many reasons not to do it, but you want a nice casual extension. About here is where I do it. And then generally from the shoulder. I don't always advise bringing it up to the eyes. You can, you see it sometimes in the manuals, but you break some of the structural integrity of the extension when you bring it up super high, and it's unnecessary. So you have that extension. So right here, and then lean the body forward and keep the there you go. Good. So this is an offensive stance. This is executed basically whenever you're doing an attack. You transition into an offensive stance. What you're seeing right here is the transition. So go back to the defensive stance. There you go. So the transition from the defensive stance to the offensive stance is an attack, and typically is the difference in what's called misura strettissima, which is the closest measure. All right, go back. All right, good. So what we're gonna do is I would like you to grab your rapiers and practice going into a defensive stance. That's the most important thing right now. We can practice offensive stance if you feel comfortable with the defensive stance. And then, so start out with executing, getting into a nice, comfortable defensive Italian rapier stance. And then once you've got that, you feel good with it, try move into it. Wait, actually, are we covering the grip yet? All right, yeah, sorry. Let's talk about the grip, and let's talk about the guards as well. So, who can talk to me a little bit about the grip, how you should grip the rapier? Anybody? Dave, do you want to show me how to grip the rapier?
So you reach out to shake the hand, and the sword goes in to that shaking. Your 3 fingers wrap under the handle. Your finger, there's a lot of different things you can do with it. What I do is I wrap around the queen and kind of ride against my queen block. Then the thumb can either ride on the quilliam block, can pinch the finger, what's the other thing? Or it can pinch the ricasso.
Okay.
So that's my version of it.
Yes. So there are a lot of nuances for how to do this. So generally, you want either one finger or two fingers above the cross. The degree to which you wrap them has advantages and disadvantages. If I wrap them all the way, the problem is if I really get way up on there, the sword is a lever, right? The sword is a lever when we're talking about geometry, and the center, the fulcrum of that lever is here on the cross. So when I put more of my hand above that cross, I have less on the other side to oppose my opponent's blade. Send your blade. I have less. Put your true edge along mine and press. Yeah. I have less to oppose because I don't have much surface area of my hand or structure of my body over on my handle to oppose that. What I want, so the total opposite of that is to have all of my hand on the other side. And I can oppose him a little bit better there, but at the same time, I'm taking some liability away from, I'm basically trading off for some point control, and I'm trading off for some of the finer actions that you can use. So, generally, I encourage having one finger across on the cross, and then what you want to do is you want to engage as much of your hand along that back ridge right here, because the back edge of your handle and the back of your pommel is what opposes the force of your opponent's blade on the true edge. That is the opposite of that lever. Basically, I'm trying to get surface area on my grip. So, finger on the other side of the cross, usually one finger if you can, and then you can have your thumb along the edge of the ricasso, the back edge of the ricasso. This makes it easier to oppose, also to oppose my opponent's blade, where I can push him around and exert force on my opponent's blade. It also makes it easier to hold prima. If I'm holding, yeah, go ahead.
I see how your thumb is again. I'm not quite seeing how
Yeah,
that.
right here.
So you're going as far as you can back, and then you're going over or under.
Yep, under. So go higher on there. Right there.
Right there.
Yeah.
One thumb. Okay.
One finger.
All right.
So the objective is that I can exert force and I can exert influence on my opponent's blade using the geometry of my hand, using the bone structure of my hand, using the bone structure of my arm to oppose. One way to check how effective your grip is with this sort of stuff is basically to have your blade and your opponent with you and your blades crossed. And basically you have them exert force going from your forte all the way up to your double A, and find out at what point you really can't oppose them anymore. And that's basically where you know the end of your ability to influence your opponent's blade is gone. So with Connor, if he's doing that, so start engaging my blade a little bit lower. Generally with the mids over your blade. All right, yeah, go up, go up, go up. Oh, there we go. All right, I've lost. That's about where I lose control of I lose the ability to really oppose my opponent's blade with any degree of influence. Any questions? David and I will be going around and looking at your grips and basically trying to see if you're getting what you want out of it. All right. Last thing we're going to cover for the basic stance and the guards is the guards. So, who can tell me what the basic? Connor, do you know what the Italian rapier guards are?
Just the names of them?
Yeah.
Prima, seconda, well, in
Yeah.
English, first, second, third, and fourth, and that's very rough. It's not really proper stance,
Okay.
but it's about where your knuckles and knuckle bow are.
Yeah.
Whether they're more vertical, horizontal, outward, vertical, downward, horizontal to your
Okay.
hairline.
Yes. All right. Did everyone hear what you just said? Okay. So generally, it's based on the orientation of the true edge of your blade, and usually the corresponding knuckle guard. Not all rapiers have knuckle guards, but generally you start out Prima is where when you draw your blade, your true edge is up and your guard is up. And then seconda is where your true edge is facing basically to the right if you're right-handed, left if you are left-handed. So yeah, you're in seconda there. All right. Then down in terza. Terza is generally the neutral stance in Italian rapier, where you start out from. Where when you're in a basic guard, usually you're in terza, which is third in Italian. And then quarta is to the opposite side, where generally your wrist is facing up. So if you're left-handed, that's the opposite of right-handed.
So there's some back and forth on these guards, and I'll show you real quick. When you take what Capofero says specifically, here's what he talks about. Anything up here is prime. When we get to flat quins, that is second. This is the only one that he really defines as your palm is down and you're flat. Anything below that and outside the knee is terza, is third. So when I come in third, it's not only here, but even this is third. Anything inside the knee is fourth, is quarta. So think about this range is prim, this range is seconda, and then you've got terza, and you've got quarta, okay? Because a lot of times when you're going through the plates, when you're trying to figure stuff out, you'll read, oh, but that was in quarta, but I'm not up all the way up here. You actually are down here instead. It's just inside the knee.
And it's perfectly fine to say terza quarta or terza seconda, because people generally know what you mean. It's like when you're saying southwest or southeast.
Right, so somewhere in between, basically.
Yes.
Yeah.
The whole
3.5.
But yeah, generally the objective is that you are the context for when you are going into the different guards, specifically terza, quarta, and seconda, is orienting your true edge to your opponent's blade, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So that's the context to it, and if they're a little bit over here, then maybe it's better to be here than up in a full quarta.
So there's an extra quadrant that you haven't addressed. That's the
That would still
Comes
be
back
quarta. That would still be quarta.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's still quarter.
So, yeah, it's just the only time I would ever go into that is if like you were cutting down on my head. There's almost no reason I've ever found to go much beyond this, but yeah, absolutely.
Generally, you're pretty structurally weak once you get up into this area. Okay, so now we're gonna do what I was gonna originally say to you guys were gonna be doing before. So start out, get a basic defensive stance, get comfortable with it, get comfortable with moving your front foot a little bit freely. Try to orient your rear foot backward, get that lean in, and then work the different guards. So I would say let's not worry about prima at this point, because prima is its whole own separate deal, which sometimes requires a different stance to be effective. And so work from seconda, terza, and quarta. Get comfortable with that. Get comfortable with transition, and then do on your own transition into an offensive stance. When you transition to an offensive stance, lead with the extension. Don't lean first and then extend. What I like to say when I'm teaching is metal before meat. Always bring the metal first before your meat goes forward. Okay, so metal before meat. So do that on your own. Then what we're going to do is we're going to pair up. We're going to be wearing masks. So I'm just demonstrating at this point, and we're going to get opposing to each other. So you go into the offensive stance right here. Nope. So, all right, and then go back to a defensive stance, and try to make sure you are engaging your hip and your legs as little as possible, because that is what's called a firm-footed lunge, and we'll cover that in a second. So do that. So extend first before you lean. There. Good. Do it with the mask. Any questions? Practice.
To launch, I'm straightening my leg, and to recover, I'm straightening my leg.
To make that work, your back foot is not in line with your heel. You've got a broader base. You've got your foot further out.
One thing I need to say though. All right. So when he says straighten, he does not mean lock out. Don't
lock out.
Don't lock out, because that slows you down. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about that in a second. But generally, whenever David or I say, or anybody says straighten, don't lock it.
There's still an angle in my elbow when I'm straight.
A comfortable, natural extension.
But Lloyd, you're right. Big stance is good. One of the things I've done over
90.
That's a 90. Right. One of the things I've done over the years is I have preferred to be able to sneak a blade between my feet. So my heels aren't not that far. My heels aren't exactly in line though. Right. And what I have found is that for me, when I can just get up past each other, is a much more comfortable stance. I don't end up accidentally teeing up. So absolutely, he's correct that Capofero says your heels should be in a line, but I take that line just a little bit off the edge, and then I step. Right. And that to me allows, as Lloyd says, mechanically I can now have a little bit more leverage because it's a little bit further off to launch into my lunge.
And Matt was having problems with the balance.
Just the
Like
balance aspect of it.
This is a balance.
Yep.
I
You don't
don't know how
have.
much you guys can.
And you,
Come on, balance.
and if you look at me now, about 3 or 4 inches between on that line. Right. Because you're still fine.
Right.
So yeah, once you start crossing, you're right, then your hips also start moving weird things. So if you open up a little bit, that's perfectly fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
That makes it much easier to go back. Just take any forward step.
Right. A little bit back.
Yes.
Much more
I
comfortable.
almost try to clear my heels, adjust, and he's going a little bit more.
Yeah. And also, I mean, as I pointed out earlier, the 3 stances you see up there, this back stance versus stride, is that front leg, chest. Then you'll also see this mid stance where your chest is up and down, your legs are display. And there's this defensive part. Coming forward. I'm not in my legs. But I'm doing that this way. This is vital for me. Part of it. Being able to do this, my feet are on stance, but I'm forward moving. Okay? So just so you know, get that platform and be able to move around that platform without moving the platform itself.
I'm moving
That
pretty
makes
forward.
so much more sense. That feels so much better.
All right, everybody. So let's. I think we don't really need to do the pair drills at this point because I want to move forward into the footwork, and then we can start talking about the more once we're on a common page about footwork, stances, and the forms of attack. And then we can really start getting into the real meat of what David and I can really teach you outside of just the basic stuff. So footwork. Let's just go over some basic footwork real quick. All right, David, can you show me what an advance is?
An advance.
An advancing step.
So realize as I advance, what I have right here is the balls of my feet are touching, my heels are actually floating. So for me, an advance is as simple as picking up the right foot because the left foot's already kind of pushing into the world. So I'm just advancing that way. And the same thing here. I'm going to pick up the back foot, and because I'm lightly pressing on the front foot, I automatically push myself back. Yeah. Does that make sense? This is another reason not to be on the heel. You engage the balls of your feet for many reasons, and one of them is it makes it easier to move back and forth.
So with basic advance is that the front foot moves first, and I'm not taking big steps. Okay, I'm not doing this. Okay, that gives a giant tempo. If you don't know what tempo is, it gives a giant tempo, and it brings me off balance for a longer period of time. I want to generally take shorter steps than I do larger steps. So really, a foot length is just fine. You know, even half a foot length. If my teacher Gary, he does tiny steps. He does the tiniest little steps. He's almost shuffling when he's going around.
So about that, let me throw this in there real quick, and this will again lead into what I'm doing. So something I didn't appreciate for years is my advancing step should be very smooth and sneaky. I should not be doing things like where my opponent, even if he's not watching me, he can feel me coming in. One of the reasons for this is when we get to the tactics, one of the things I'll try and do is I'll try and occupy my opponent's attention a little bit, and when he's doing something else, I'll sneak in. And so I want him to not understand that I have just grabbed 6 extra inches of space. So when you're thinking about your advancing approach, think about keeping your body as still as you can, because you're sneaking in on them. All right?
sometimes you can use leaning to kind of preoccupy your opponent, or you can basically do like a leaning shuffle, you know, where kind of, maybe I'm moving there, maybe I'm moving in. Maybe we're too occupied with our blade work to think about it.
Right.
So, anyway, advancing and retreating, still basic in all forms of fencing. Front foot goes first, rear foot catches up. If you're going back, rear foot goes first, front foot catches up. Passing footwork, opposite. So when you're passing, please do a passing footwork.
So when I'm passing, usually it also means my weight has already gone neutral. So I'm just pulling one foot past the other. And I've read recently, I think it was, I don't remember which author, who defines passing as both steps. So you're not only passing one, and I'm still not passing, I'm going to pass the other step as well and end up back where I was. Or ideally, what I might do is pass, hit, and then pass and get out of range again.
Yeah. So, advantages of passing footwork is that it covers more ground quick in a shorter period of time. Disadvantage is that it takes me off balance for a longer period of time, and just by the very nature of my feet passing each other, I have to square my hips more. I expose more of my body. I expose more of my target area as I'm doing it. So, but there's a time and place for it. If you're chasing Boomy down, you probably might have to be doing some passing footwork in there. So maybe I'll figure out how to do it with just normal advancing footwork.
It's called teleporting. Yeah.
All right. So another thing is gathering steps. So let's talk about what a gathering step is. So there's a passing step is where my feet actually pass each other, right? A gathering step is where I bring it forward and basically where I'm gathering my feet forward. It's a blend of both. Generally, while we're within the context of what we're doing today, advancing and retreating footwork without passing is a very conservative and perfectly good way to do things. So, on your own. Well, actually, no, we don't need to drill this out. All right. So, any questions about advancing and passing forward? Oh, let's do lateral forward. All right. Moving laterally. There's two different schools of thoughts about moving laterally. Some masters say, do it naturally. You know, if it feels good, going to the right or left, do it. There's the natural school of thought. The other way is generally that people will tell you is just don't cross your feet. So if I'm moving to the left, I move my left foot first. If I'm going to the right, I move with my right foot first. Has anyone heard different kinds of advice about moving laterally? Some people say don't move laterally at all. Tattershell says don't move laterally. Generally advises against moving laterally. Fabrice is all about it. But why would I move laterally? Someone give me an idea why I would move laterally.
Get off line with your opponent's blade.
Okay. Yes. So.
Yeah, changing angles, basically, is what we do.
Change angle. So one thing that, so if I want to, is this yours? Is it okay if I pick it up? It's closer than my sword. If I'm with David, so if I want to cross his blade, and you know, let's say I don't want to touch his, I can go across him, you know, but I'm giving him tactile feedback when I'm doing that. If I want to cross him without giving him any kind of tactile feedback, I can change the angle. I just achieved the exact same objective without giving him any tactile feedback at all.
Also, if your opponent likes to circle, a lot of times I find I have to somehow try and circle with them, and that's been some lateral pieces of play.
Yeah. But like we said earlier, generally the smaller movement is better. Just doing a small shuffle to the side can achieve just as much as taking a big giant step.
And me being the lazy person I am, I'll say this. If Julien and I are at this range, I don't care how I walk. I don't have to be in range when he can't get me. The footwork we're showing you now only comes into play when I'm now in danger and I have to stay on guard to protect myself. If I'm back here, yeah, wonderful. So I see some people going to great pains to always be in guard, and to me that's wasting a whole lot of energy when he's never going to be able to reach me anyway.
Yeah, basically actions that happen out of measure are irrelevant.
Yeah.
but make sure you know what your opponent's measure is.
And we'll get to that.
That is super important. Make sure you know you're outmeasured. All right, one thing I just realized we didn't cover in regard to stance is offhand, placement of the offhand, okay? Offhand can be generally used as three uses, okay? One is counterbalance. I'm moving all of my weight forward, and I have my rear arm back to provide a form of counterbalance. Okay, that's effective. There's what, maybe 10 pounds in my arm, maybe more. Still, that helps. Okay, and I can use it as a way to basically use sympathetic body motions to kind of course through my body back. So there's the counterbalance aspect of it. The other aspect is using it to blade my body as an action to blade my body. If I'm lunging at David and I keep my arm in place, generally I'm going to be a little bit more square with it. But when I throw that back, I have less target area that I'm exposing to. There's way more ability for my whatever metal I have out here to cover my target area. The third way, which I'm sure you all see all the time in the SCA, is using it to bat aside my opponent's play. By having it in my presence, I can throw it away or do any sorts of things. That's part of the manuals, but generally you see the most masters say you can do that, but it's not really the artful way of doing it. So what you see most of the time in Italian rapier is generally they keep their hands around their chin. Generally have it right up here. That way it can do a nice little swat. I can keep it away from my upper thoracic area, and I can also really quickly throw it back. Doing a more classical fencing stance is also good. I mean, it still achieves the counterbalance and blading aspect of using your offhand. Any thoughts?
You'll see a lot of pictures of me online where I'm doing what John and Zenas, it's one of those called sword type 5, and I'll be here. Because a lot of times, the only thing I'll try to use my hand for is protecting the face. Otherwise, I want to try and use my sword to try and drive everything around. So yeah, it's kind of almost near the cheap, but out there. But yeah, everything he says.
Okay, let's take a quick 5-minute break. Who can tell me what a firm-footed lunge is? Yes, your feet do not move, but I am executing the rest of the lunge besides that. So, how we execute the firm-footed lunge is we do the exact same stuff we did earlier for going from transitioning to the defensive stance to an offensive stance, where I extend and then I lean forward. So extend, lean forward, good. And now what I do is I engage the lower part of my body, where I straighten my rear leg, and there we go. All right, and now try to lean. Is that as far as you can lean forward? There, all right. So that is a firm-footed lunge. So here, I have the same order of motion, all right? I start with the extension, I lean, and then my rear leg extends, and my front leg bends. So I'm right here. This can validate if maybe your feet are a little too close together to remain structurally soundly good. You saw my feet were a little close there, and then I lean forward, and then maybe right here I might be a little bit rocking forward, and I might be a little bit off balance. Maybe I'm going to have a little bit of a further apart stance in order to execute that. Let's talk about the very controversial topic of whether your knees should be going beyond your toes or not. So different thoughts about this. I learned where your knee does go beyond your toe. You see it a lot. You see it a fair amount in the texts. You see it in Capoferro. You see it in Gigante. You see it in Agrippa during the original his original diagram of the lunge. Quite frankly, it really doesn't matter that much, whether you do or you don't. If you feel like you feel pain when you're here, when you're in this position, or when you're in this position, you don't have to do it. If this feels better for you, then as long as you are executing the rest of the lunge well, that's what I'm more interested in. However, I'm also going to throw this out to David to give his thoughts as well.
So yeah, let me jump in there. So a few things. The way I stand up, I already talked about the balls of the feet. If you are on the balls of your feet and you go into your lunge, think about cats, think about dogs. They're always in the balls of their feet, effectively. This is still mechanically sound. When I plant that heel, it creates a lot of tension. That is the problem. The other thing that I think gets mistranslated is the real problem is when you're doing this kind of a dynamic lunge is going past 90 degrees in the knee. And if you'll notice, even in my deep lunge, I'm probably not past 90 degrees in my lunge, okay?
Clarify, you mean the internal angle?
The internal angle here from my thigh to my calf, okay? If you note, throughout the fencing manuals, and I'll look at one called Linkor, he goes way down deep, but he still goes to 90 degrees on his knee. He does not go over that toe, even though he's going into a very deep lunge. So to me, the problem isn't going over the toe. The problem is whether you are folding this into an acute angle and putting all the tension on it. Now, I would say, do what's comfortable, as Julien says, but make sure if you're going to catch yourself, you're on the balls of your foot, and you try not to fold that into an acute angle. And honestly, I can get a great, huge lunge without doing either one of those things. I'm on the balls of my foot, I'm not yet at 90, I feel safe, this is strong and built up, and I've been doing that lunge for probably 20 years now, with the same knee. So, anyway, that is my mechanical thought.
Yeah, you see that especially in the later manuals. So in Liancourt, what you were talking about, in Bondi Damaso, which is a manual from the 1670s, I think. You see, it almost looks like a blend of a sport fencing lunge and an earlier time break lunge, where it's like boom here, but then he also is engaging his torso. Like this is like a Bondi Damaso lunge right here. But let's go back to the firm-footed lunge. Why would I do a firm-footed lunge? Well, I am, by doing a firm-footed lunge, so I'll do this against you. Make sure not. So I'll wear a mask because I want to be a good example. I'm doing a firm-footed lunge, so generally I'd say probably right here is good. So don't oppose my blade just yet. So go back to comfortable neutral terza. All right. So I'm doing a firm-footed lunge, partially because by not having to engage my into a step, I am basically taking a more conservative action. So when I do just extend, lean forward, it's a nice conservative action. Generally, I don't want to be engaging more of my body than is necessary in order to execute an attack. It creates less visual cues for my opponent to key off of. If one of the main things that our opponent's going to key off of when you're executing actions that they're going to react to is foot movement. So if I don't have to take that step, I don't really want to. In an SCA context, that's one less explosive action than maybe if Connor's also lunging into me, so if you lunge and then take a step, you know, if I'm not stepping, you know, I'm not going to necessarily peg him, but if I'm going at the same time and we're both doing that explosive action at the same time, I'm going to get a call from Marshall. But that's an SCA context thing.
Well, and you'll see in manuals, Julien and I are fighting. Actually, it's fine, yeah. So Julien and I are fighting. I have invited him to lunge at me, and he lunges at me. Go ahead. Okay, and then I counter lunge, and you see in the manual, this is why you're riding 3 foot past his face, which we don't want to do in the SCA. So yeah, being able to control when you lunge and when you don't lunge, or when you take that step, is pretty vital to not hurting some of your friends, right?
All right. Yeah, we want to kill our friends and not hurt them. So, all right. So that's what. So the firm-footed lunge is a nice conservative extension that we can have. It does leave us. The only liability to it is that it can leave us very forward weighted. So I'm here. Sometimes your body will just naturally want to take a step. That's fine. Your body wants to naturally take a step. It's just become a shorter lunge. That's fine. I'm going to talk about the lunge itself, and then we're going to talk a little bit about the order of movement, which is really the most important part of the lunge for the purposes of this instruction. So, the lunge is really probably the most important attack for fencing since maybe. What the lunge is I'm in a basic defensive stance. It begins with the extension. I extend the arm first. Then my body leans. Once again, I'm not kicking out my butt with this. So a lot of times, it's easy to think, oh, I'm leaning. No, you're kicking out your butt and you don't have a lot of, and you're losing structure when you do this. So I want the lean to be comfortably forward. If this is as far forward as you can lean comfortably without kicking out your butt, then do that. Okay. But extend, lean. Then, as I move forward, as my back leg extends, if I'm not going to go to a full front foot. If I really want to do a lunge, I'm not going to go to that fully forward weighted stance before I pick up my foot, because then it's just going to become this artificial stop. I want that step to happen naturally as my rear leg extends. And like Dave was saying, generally that wants to be coming from the ball of your foot. If your foot is facing toward the rear, like we were talking about earlier, I'm hoping you guys give it a chance a little bit. That power is coming from the extension, generally from the ball of your foot. So extend, lean, then as my rear leg starts to propel me forward, I'm coming into my lunge. And if I'm doing a basic, generally as a default, I put my arm back. There are exceptions to this. If I'm doing something where I'm opposed to the corner to the outside, and I'm going forward and I'm doing this lunging to him, and I'm just lunging your left. I might want to bring and I haven't gained, let's say, I might want to bring my arm forward and bring my hand forward as just a natural step for that. Generally, if you're gonna bring your hand somewhere other than throwing it back, have a plan for it. Don't just put it somewhere just cause. Have a plan for it. Have it part there as maybe a cover for your blade. Maybe if I'm down here, I might have it higher up. But as a default, generally I want to send it back. So extend, metal before me, lean, and then the recovery. There are different ways to recover. I generally do what Gigante prescribes as the recovery, which is to lead with your head. And the reason for that is when I'm extended, you can all look at me. So when I'm extended, if I have my arm and my sword well extended, well in front of me, protecting me. So the most exposed and most in danger part of my body is my head. Okay? This is what's going to get killed if my opponent does like a really good riposte against me. So I also want to get that out of the way as soon as possible. So I'm going back, I bring my head back, and that leads the recovery to the rear. So I begin the extension, extend, lean, step, and then go back with the head, bring it back. And the reason why we don't lock out our leg is so, once we're in that extended position, I'm able to immediately engage my knee into that recovery back here. If my leg is locked out, I have to unhinge my knee before that happens. I can't just go back like that. It doesn't work. My skeletal structure doesn't work like that. But if I have a little bit of bend to it, I can really easily just bring my leg back into that bent position and get back into that recovered stance. Any questions? I can talk a little bit more about the theory of this real quick. Why do we extend with the sword and the arm and then lean before we do the step? Why don't we do it all together? Because I'll be the first one to say, if I do it all at the same time, I can probably do it quicker. The fastest lunge I can possibly do is more of a sport fencing lunge, where I'm in a sport fencing here, I'm relaxed. That's really fast. I can do that super fast. But it's not necessarily part of the blade work that precedes doing the lunge, that protects you in conjunction with all of it.
Your face and chest should not be coming forward before your sword is protecting you. So what we're doing is we're protecting ourselves with the sword first, and then you're bringing the very vital bits forward. One of the things that his maestro Gary used to teach, I don't know if he still does, is this is a missile, and you bring your sword up, and then this starts pulling you. And it pulls you at the waist until you're done, and then your knee follows it, or your step follows it. But in any case, that sword has to come up to protect you. And we'll get to it because this is a very tactical move that we're doing as well. So it's also very important that you understand, sword comes up first, sword goes down last whenever you're doing your lunge.
Yes, and you keep that extension until you're back here, and then you might bring your sword back. One of the main reasons also for why we extend first is because, like I said, people key off the movement. The biggest movement you're going to make is with your feet, with the lunge. So having that nice extension right here, this could happen if I do it slowly. Could happen before they're even keying into it. And then I take the step, close the distance, I've landed the touch. Another way to look at it, besides the initial thing, so you have it, is to think of it as a rope or being pulled.
Yeah.
So think of it, if that helps you keep that order of movement in mind, just being pulled into it. That's also a way to look at it. Any questions about the lunge and the recovery?
One thing I want to talk about the lunge. I still practice lunges to this day. I have done tens of thousands of them. And one of the examples I will give you is from any discipline, piano, basketball. You don't get good at playing a sonata by trying to play the sonata. You get good by doing your chords and your scales over and over again. LeBron James, to this day, still does layups. He still does free throws. He still practices them. And what I'm trying to get at is you need to be able to have done enough lunges that you know, without looking at your body right now, that my knee is over my toe, that I'm protecting myself, that I've done this correctly, and that when I recover, I've recovered correctly. Drilling your lunges is one of the most vital parts you can always do in fencing, because you have to always, and I still slow down, I will still make sure, because I found myself wandering around on the inside of the just a few weeks ago. Always drill slowly, speed it up, smooth it out, and then keep doing them, and do hundreds of them. Because this is what everything else is built on. The ability to be able to, without even thinking, throw a lunge at someone is what builds into all the following tactics we'll get to after lunge. But this is vital.
So this is in context. Like I said, generally I'm not doing a lunge that's completely unopposed, where him and I are in guard and I see an opening, and I'll execute any blade work except for that lunge. The lunge happens in conjunction with other blade work. But we're talking about the mechanics of lunge. One phrase that I have a problem with is the idea is people saying, practice doesn't make perfect, perfect practice makes perfect. No, you're not perfect, you're human, okay? Try to do your best. Try to do your best, work on it, but don't let the idea that you're not doing it perfectly make you not do it. Make you not try to do it. So we phrase. That's a great phrase. He said, don't let perfect be the enemy of good. Okay, I would rather you be good than I would rather you be good like next month than perfect 2 years from now. Do your best.
So I drill the lunge?
Yeah, let's drill the lunge. So, team with a partner. I want you and your partner to basically observe each other doing that lunge. Do it slowly. Start with the basic parts. Doing isolation. I'm just doing the extension. Then build it up to extending into the lead. And always do the recovery. Don't do the recovery as part of it, okay? When I come back, don't extend. Go forward and left. Keep the recovery solid. So, and then transition into that. Into the firm footed lunge. And then, but not, don't do it like I did just now. The actual lunge doesn't happen like at the conclusion of the firm footed lunge generally. It might happen once in a while, but if you're going to do lunge, do it naturally as part of that extension. So get comfortable doing that. Build it progressively. Do it in opposition to each other. Don't oppose your blades, but get used to actually landing that. And then going back while executing the recovery. Try to leave in your head. If it feels terrible, do it normal. Any questions? Find a partner. When I'm out to measure my opponent. What is the furthest out measure I can hit someone with? What's the action? What is the action that I can, what's the furthest action, what is the longest action that I can hit someone in one tempo?
Lunge with a step.
So, a passing lunge. So, and what I mean by passing lunge is basically the furthest I can get off of by keeping my front foot in the same place, as opposed to my back foot for a normal lunge. So, from here I can. So, at the extension of my arm, is it okay if I use? So, at the extension of my arm, so right there. All right. He's basically at what we call misura larghissima, which is the largest measure. So right now, misura larghissima is the furthest out that where I can hit my opponent in a passing lunge to their body. If where their hand is becomes a little bit more gray area, but that's also a lot more. We're really just talking about the measure of the body for the purposes of this. So if someone is in, or if I'm in my opponent's misura larghissima, how much threat do I really have? How much are they really threatening? A bit. Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, a bit. Okay, I need to be on my guard. But generally, I have a little bit of breathing time. What's the next one? What's the next action? The next closest action? A lunge. And what's that measure? Who can? You said one of them earlier. Larga. So larga is misura larga is the measure at which I can hit my opponent with a lunge. This is when you really start to get into where my actions matter, where little things that I do wrong start to have big consequences. So, and I know I'm overlapping a little bit with the video, with your lesson that Colette posted like a month ago with you. So, I would call this medium threat. My actions really have consequences. My little mistakes have consequences. After the next one. What is the next one? Misura stretta. What action is where I can? What is the action that I can hit someone at misura stretta?
Firm-footed.
That's it. The firm-footed lunge. The firm-footed lunge, where I basically the furthest out that I can hit someone without basically having to pick up my feet. This is what I would call high foot.
What was the word?
Stretta.
P-foot, high foot. Measure a stretta.
So, like I said, high foot. Okay. And the last one, and I'm just gonna straight out say it, is misura strettissima. Strettissima is where I can hit someone just by going into an extension, or going from a defensive stance to an offensive stance. Boop. I've hit my opponent. And what kind of threat do you think you would call that?
Danger, Bill Robinson.
I would say unacceptable threat. If you are not even very high threat, unacceptable threat. If you're in strettissimo with your opponent, get out of there. Get out of there. You are in Danger Will Robinson territory where this is bad. At that point, it's basically whoever's fastest. And in real life, you'd probably both be stabbing. You'd probably both stab each other anyway at that distance. So I'm gonna say unacceptable threat. I'm going to digress real quick into reaction time. So when we think about someone's reaction time, we think about the idea, all right, we think, someone acts and we react. As a lot of people with a basic grounding in science know, there's a certain degree of there's a lot of things that happen between between them acting and me reacting. There's me recognizing that it's happening. I see that visually. There's my brain actually processing that along with it. There's my brain deciding what I'm going to do in response to that. There's my brain telling my muscles to do that, and then the speed it takes to act to do that. Connor, can you stand up? So what I'm going to do is hold out your hand, okay? Right up here. So I want you to close your fingers just a little bit more. I'm going to drop this marker, okay? And you are going to close your hand on that marker, okay? You know what's going to happen, and you know exactly what you're going to do to it, right? Yeah. So I'm going to drop it, okay? It's okay. That's for do one more time. So he has a pretty good reaction time. That being said, there's still a big gap. That marker is still covered, even pretty much all of the distance of it between, and that there's no decision-making process in there. It's just seeing it and executing the action that you've already decided to do. This also goes into fencing. There is a certain distance with my opponent at which I am too close to him to react, for him to react in time to it happening. By the time I'm here, it's just really a question of how quick I can get it. Yeah. That's one of the reasons why misura strettissima is unacceptable threat, and why stretta is also a pretty damn high threat. How can we make these things less threatening?
Close the line so that you don't have the direct attack.
Yes. So we can close the lines. We can use angles and blade work to make them basically our opponents take bigger actions rather than a direct strike to you. But real quick, let's talk, because we didn't talk about passing. What are the advantages and disadvantages of a passing lunge versus a lunge?
Range.
So the advantage is range. Probably the big advantage is range, right? My lunge is to here, so can you advance to where that is? Okay. And my pass is here. Okay, that's a not inconsequential distance. That being said, I'm right here. Do you think I can recover as quickly as I can from a lunge position when I'm here? Absolutely not. I am way off balance. If that attack was unsuccessful, I really only have one way out of here, and that's basically skedaddling that way, pretty much. If I go this way, I'm running into a little bit of threat coming in close. I'm basically gotta get out of there at that point, and I'm going in a predictable direction. I also have more target area, like we were talking about with passing footwork. I have to square my hips a little bit more. Fabre says that I still want to basically try to keep my upper body as bladed as possible, but still, it's hard. So it's longer, it reaches further, and I expose a little bit, and I expose more target area. Dave, do you have any thoughts on passing lunges?
We'll get to the tempo thing. Okay. We'll talk about why long tempo is hard.
Yes.
Great.
I'm trying not to step on David speak too much about tempi, but like we were saying, we can mitigate some of this threat by using angles, by using blade work to make our opponent take larger actions in conjunction with it. So, what I want you to do, we're going to get pairs again, and I want us to, with your partner, figure out what your distance is, what your distance is, and what their distance is for our different measures. So misura larghissima, their passing lunge distance; misura larga, their lunging distance; misura stretta, their front-footed lunge distance; and misura strettissima. Once you've got that, I want you to do one more thing, and that is I want you to figure out your distance where you can hit your opponent inside of their reaction time. So basically the idea is put on your mask and I'll put on mine.
And I have to have a reaction.
I'm doing basically that marker drill that I did with Connor, except with lunging. So I'm basically getting with him, and basically I'm telling you, hey, I want you to pair it. I want you to, so you're not finding me just yet. So they're more of a neutral terza. So right about there. So a neutral terza position where our blades are engaged with each other, and we're getting to the point where I want you to parry me the moment you see me start to execute that lunge. So a little bit further out, right here, there. So a bit closer. So get to that point. So don't. If you're going too explosive, you may hurt your opponent. So use your judgment when you're doing it, but figure out how close do I have to get to my opponent before I'm inside of their reaction time? How close does my opponent get to me before I know I can't physically react in time? And that can give you a really powerful tool for the fight, where you know, I'm a military man, I use crass terms, but you've got to know where that pucker factor is, where it's like, oh, I got to get out of here. So, like I said, figure out your distances for these with your opponent, figure out their distances, and then drill to find out where they're inside of your reaction time, where you're inside their reaction time. All right?
Revisiting the practicing your lunge thing, one of the things you're also doing if you're practicing your lunge well is you're finding your measures over and over again. So again, you know your measure should be secondhand at some point. So that's part of this as well.
Find a new partner, and is opposing my opponent's blade with my true edge facing theirs, as difference from the flat of my blade or the false edge of my blade. Who can tell me why that's an advantage? Okay, so strength in the muscles of your arm, yes. So the muscle, basically the way that your bones and your musculature are oriented in such a way that basically this is stronger than this. It's the same concept as the idea that pushing is stronger than pulling. Also, metal is bendy. Metal is more bendy in a smaller area than it is on a larger area. When I have the smaller area opposing to them, it bends more. When I have the larger sectional density opposing theirs, it doesn't bend very much at all. Sometimes it will if I use it. But by opposing my true edge with my opponent's blade, I can exert more force onto them than I would using the flat. The next one is leverage. What do I mean by leverage? What I mean by leverage is having a part of my blade that is closer to the fulcrum. We talked about this earlier. A part of my blade that is closer to the fulcrum versus a part of my opponent's blade that is further from their fulcrum. I have my opponent in submission right here. So by having that leverage, and then when he's opposing me right here, he has me in submission. So by simple leverage, that is, I am allowed to have better influence. Leverage. Anyone guess what the other one is? The last one is? Angles. That is one way of putting it. Okay. Generally, the way that I'm going to describe for the purpose of this is the crossing. And what that means is putting my blade on top of theirs. Why is this an advantage?
Gravity.
Got gravity? Yes, that's true. Yes. Muscles, and I'm also creating a slope for my opponent. When he push toward my body. Yep, it angles right in there. See? If we're in perfect opposition, and then I get on top of his, and so push against me. Keep pushing toward like this way. Yep. If he's pushing horizontally, it slopes right in there. And that means that lends to going right into leverage. So put them all together. Got TLC. These are the three advantages that I can have of the blade. How does this factor into what's called finding and gaining? Now the manuals can be a little bit differing in their terminology. I'm going to teach a way to understand it. Finding my opponent's blade is when I create a combination of the three advantages such that he is, well, actually let's say gaining. We'll start with gaining. Gaining is when you have all three of them. When I have all three of them in an offensive stance. So I have true edge, I have leverage over him, and I have the crossing. Extended, I have my opponent gaining right here. I can basically, if he stays in place, and his blade work doesn't change, I can hit him basically without any kind of threat to me. That is what having the blade gained is. To find the blade means that I have a combination of those such that he cannot gain my blade. So instead, let's say I'm in a defensive stance right here. He cannot execute a gain of his blade. I have a little bit of define. I have a little bit of the crossing. I have the true edge on him, even if he has the true edge on me, right? Right. But I still have more of them than you do. Yeah. At this point. And I have a little bit probably better leverage than you do right here. Well, about the same. But When I have my opponent's blade found, I have prevented his gain of my blade. How these work together is that, and this is maybe going a little bit into David's up. My objective when I'm approaching into measure with my opponent is I begin with the finding of his blade, I progress, and then we're basically trying to find each other's blade. And this goes into your theory of the true fight. And then we're going for that gain. And then we're trying to hit your opponent from the gain. So when I'm approaching blade work, I'm trying to have these three things. Really, if you just understand this, you probably have like 70 to 80% of Italian rapier already figured out. So these are the three advantages. Any questions on three advantages? We're going to do a little bit of drilling this, but first, we're going to talk about defense, the different angles that also factor into this. So there are also three kinds of angles that you can conceptually think of in conjunction with this. So there's the offensive angle. Defensive angle, as opposed to stance. And you have the new game. An offensive angle means that I have the gain of my opponent. So, and let's say you're underneath me. Your blade, your hilt is underneath. No, sorry. And then bring your hilt over here. There, good. I have an offensive angle on my opponent here. I have a straight line to him, and he does not have a straight line to me, and I have the gain on him. I have an offensive angle on him. He has a weak angle on him. A weak angle means that I don't have the crossing for my opponent, and basically I don't have the crossing for my opponent, and they have a straight line to me. A defensive angle is when I generally have the find on my opponent. If I'm here, I have a defensive angle on my opponent, and he has more or less a weak angle on me. So these are all concepts that we can use to have a framework to understand whether I have the advantage of the blade work in an exchange, whether I don't have the advantage of the blade work in the exchange, and to recognize when I'm in a weak spot and when they can probably hit me without opposition, or whether I need to take a tempo to get on the other side of my opponent's blade or regain the leverage from it. Do you have anything to add so far, like that?
I don't think so. You're being introduced right now to what I consider two of the three fundamentals of swordplay. The first one was measure. The second one is effectively physics, these angles and how the swords work together. So we're 2/3 of the way for you guys to understand everything about all types of swordplay that actually goes from long sword to rapier to cut thrust and everything else. That's the only thing I can add right now.
All right, so there's. Take a look at my notes real quick. Have them divided up for some of that. All right. Good. So now we're probably going to do the most advanced two drills we're going to do today. We're going to do two of these drills. The first one that we're going to do is what we call the sticky blade drill. Who's done a sticky blade drill before? Anybody? All right, yeah, we've done sticky blade drills before. The sticky blade drill is where my opponent and I are going to, first we're going to start out static, and we're both going to have masks. And we're basically, our blades have to be engaged with each other. And we can start from the inside, and we're basically we can move around. You can move your feet. We'll start out being engaged just on either the inside or the outside. And we're just basically coming up with an angle so that I can hit my opponent using those three advantages, using the crossing, the true edge, and leverage. Your blades have to remain in contact. If you want to, you can make it a little bit more advanced by allowing someone to disengage, but you cannot strike your opponent while your blades are not touching. So that is what the sticky blades are.
Do you actually want us to try and strike
Yes, try to hit your opponent, but in order to hit your opponent, your blades have to be in contact with each other. That'll give you a little idea of how those three advantages factor into blade opposition. After that, I want to practice with your partner. Practice starting out of measure, and then one person will be coming in. So I'll be coming into you. I find my opponent's blade. At larghissima, at my passing distance with them. I advance into larga, gain my opponent's blade, and execute a lunge against my opponent. A simple progression of going in, finding their blade, turning it into a gain, and then lunging into them.
How much opposition is your opponent supposed to give you while you're doing this?
I would say progressively. So start out with none. Go into add a little bit, and then if you're comfortable with them like fully opposing, giving you all their might.
But they're really just trying to parry you or push back.
Yes, they're just
They're not
pushing
gonna
back.
disengage
They're not doing disengage, and you can add a little bit of, if you really want to get crazy with it, you can add a little bit of offline footwork to make it a little bit more sympathetic. So in this case, I found Connor. I'm just going to lunge to your bicep. In this case, no, I'm doing it. So I'm just lunging to his bicep in this case, and I might step a little bit offline to reinforce that footwork. Any questions? Are we clear with our instructions? We'll do this for 10-15 minutes until you're comfortable. Ask me or David any questions as you see fit, and then we'll go into lunch. So
The hint and the tempo that I'm giving him to spiral in and strike. So that's the second part of this plate. The third part, yes ma'am.
How often do people hit hard doing that because you're coming in, your opponent's coming in?
Okay, tangent. So a tangent, real quick. When we're throwing shots, what I do not want to see you doing is jabbing. One of the other reasons that we extend the arm and bend the body and bend the knee, it increases my targeting by a long shot, and also it gives me more control. And if I'm about to hit Julien, if I'm about to hit Julien and he's stepping in on me, I still have the ability to absorb that shot. Yes, ma'am.
It's also why you don't lock your elbow.
Yes, it's also why you don't lock your elbows, so you can get some bend. So there's like, I've now said 3 or 4 or 5 reasons on why not to lock your elbow. All that to say, I can hit that string on Julien's arm if I simply extend my blade, lean into it, and then bend my leg. If I am jabbing, a couple of things happen. My point control, which is about a quarter size right now, goes to about this because you're loading your muscles and going. And 2, if he's stepping in on me, I can't stop, but I've already loaded and shot at him. So good technique also helps us from gacking our friends. So to answer your question, if you've got the good technique going, the worst thing that I think ever has happened to me, punch in the chest.
with my whole body, or
Just your sword. Now, go. Actually, go ahead and press. Because what happens is when you press it, when you're pressing your points, you have more control to also to break that wrist and to get that happening. Whereas if you're jabbing, you're usually putting the entire force of that blade into someone. So we will have hard hits, but because I'm placing the blade instead of really jabbing the blade, I also can rearrange what's going to happen with it. So I don't see a whole lot of gags going on that much in that way. Okay? So that's my tangent on how to use your sword. Extend the arm, extend the body. Your body weight is enough going forward to puncture your friend. It only takes 2 or 3 pounds of pressure. So once I release my weight and gravity takes over, I don't have to use these muscles to jab. If I've got control of the blade, I don't have to blow through someone's blade. So control the blade and fall into them. All right, does that make sense? That is one way we can keep from hurting each other and have better technique to move.
Another way to look at it that I like to say is, like little phrases, I have to say that my foot brings my point into line, not my hand. That, you know, if basically I'm orienting my body to land the point, not, you know, just not flinging the sword.
Right. Okay, so little tangent, but also a very important one. How to control the sword, and one of the other reasons that we extend the arm is to increase your point control and to be able to counteract anything that may really go bad. So, again, we have the first two parts of this. The ideal fight, and the ideal fight when he does a cavazione and takes it back from me. So now, we get into the idea of, as I said earlier, my ideal fight is programmed into my head. So now I'm watching to see what weird thing he does when I try and pull off the ideal fight. So I can now clear my head and watch for that cavazione to happen. So as I close in, I program the ideal fight, it's there, I'm not going to think about it anymore. I am waiting for the twitch reaction. And if I trigger a twitch reaction in cavazione, then all I've got to do, I can continue the same body motions. I'm just rolling my hand now to take his offline again. And in fact, I've kind of set him up to do that. I've come in, I've covered this line. This is now a pretty safe area. I know that his most likely thing that he's going to try and do is over here. So all I've got to do is take that tempo, catch him back offline, and keep closing. This is also why I break down the lunge with this and this first, because this is a threat, this is a threat, and this is what you're probably going to react to. But I still have full ability to not do anything with my leg, and if he reacts by going on the other side of the sword, I can just switch arms and follow in. So I haven't fully committed yet when I'm in this offensive stance. I have told him what I want him to do. I've told him very loudly what I want to do. And then he reacts to it before I've even committed fully with my leg. And I have a chance to rearrange. Does that make sense? That is the third part of this. So now, the person who won the first time, the ideal fight, is going to win again. He or she is going to trigger that cavazione and then catch it and continue with the lunge and just finish it up. Make sense? I want you to drill the motions. We're learning the plate right now. We're going to come back to it in a little bit and start looking at some more details in this plate that I'm not telling you right now. I'm hiding it from you. All right? Pair up, go.
Sure.